After nearly 500 episodes, I can tell you one thing. A podcast does not make you visible or an authority all by itself. What makes you that is knowing what you want to be known for and then building a show and leveraging that show to deepen the trust and building the systems and the relationships that help turn your voice into a long-term authority asset. As we approach my 500th episode of Amplify Your Success, I want to look at what 10 years behind this podcast microphone has taught me on how to leverage a podcast the way most business coaches learn way too late. Hey, it's Melanie Benson. I am your host of the Amplify Your Success podcast. And today I want to share how I am using my podcast in a way that a lot of business owners and business coaches and entrepreneurs and experts are not really locking into. And podcasting over the last 10 years has grown exponentially. We've seen massive, massive exponential growth in this sector, but same time, we've seen a lot of die off, a lot of pod fade, a lot of people thinking they were going to get this quick burst and then frustrated they weren't seeing the results they wanted to. So, as I was preparing for the celebration of the 500th episode, which basically means I've been podcasting, what was it, close to 9 years. And I've been podcasting for much longer than that. I started podcasting in 2010 with my first show, which I don't continue to feed anymore. I've been thinking about what does podcasting look like today? And how can we podcast in a way that actually grows our business? This is not just about like, how do you get sponsorships? This is about how do you turn it into an asset that grows your business for you? So if you don't know me yet, hi, Melanie Benson. I'm an authority amplifier. I am founder of the Rising Tide Collective. I write a Substack called Growth Fuel, which if you're on Substack, you'll definitely want to check out. And I have been talking about the power of podcasting for as long as I can remember now, because as soon as I started to really see the results of this podcast, everybody wanted me to talk about either how to be a guest or how to have a podcast that actually grows your business. So on another episode, we will talk about the lessons that I've learned through podcast guesting. But today I want to talk about if you are hosting your own show, and you can apply so much of this to other platforms like YouTube, any live streams, Substack, podcasting, all of the things, right? I want to go deeper into what a podcast really is and how it ties into your business, because ultimately, you want your podcast to keep you visible after you've hit publish. You don't want it to die on the vine, so to speak. You don't want the episode to go out and then it just collects dust and gets you crickets. And where a lot of people go astray when they think about podcasting, and this may be because this is what you learned, it may be because you kind of are winging it and you've tried to figure it out on your own, is like your podcast isn't the growth strategy. I want that to sink in for a second. Your podcast is not the growth strategy. Your authority is. Your podcast is a mechanism to showcase your authority. So I've got 10 lessons I want to unpack here. I'm going to go through them on the quicker side. And I'd love to hear any questions or any ahas that you have as we go through it. Because I want to reframe what might be missed before so you can lean into what's working and how to grow it from here on out. So here's number one. And this is something I do with my clients who come to me and say, Melanie, can you help me figure out my podcast? I work with a lot of thought leaders who had a podcast before or are creating a podcast for the first time, and they've been kind of stalling out because there's a lot of things to think about. You need to know why you're creating this podcast before you ever decide on the name of it. You decide on what you're going to hit record and talk about on the show. Because a podcast without a clear purpose literally just becomes an obligation. And if you're not fired up about what you're talking about in the podcast, you're not going to want to keep doing it, because a successful podcast is a commitment. You don't just show up when you want to. You show up because you have a body of work to share. You have insights that can transform other people. And a consistently published podcast is a very powerful way to nurture leads, to build your authority, to open the door to collaboration currency, as I call it, to deepen trust with your audience. And it should, now this is really the key part, it should be part of a larger content ecosystem. Because if it's just kind of hanging out there on its own, it's not doing the work it needs to do. So when you start a podcast because somebody said you should have a podcast, or because you saw someone else that you admire who had a podcast, you're like, oh, I should start one too. You really need to know why you're doing this. You know, what is the purpose? Which basically means you need to know what you want out of it. And when we get clear on that and we create the podcast that can serve that purpose, it should do all the heavy lifting for you. Okay, so this should not be a should. This should be where you get sparked to connect with people outside of your immediate circle and grow your reach in a very powerful way. So let's talk about lesson 2. This one has been heartbreaking for a lot of people that probably were sold a bill of goods by some really clever salesperson who said, oh, we can start getting you leads in the door. You need a podcast, or get on YouTube. You'll start attracting leads, right? Look, a podcast is not a short-term lead machine. I am so sorry to break the bubble, but it is a long game authority asset. This is a huge expectation gap that I know so many people fall prey to. And I will be honest, if I'm looking back, I really thought that when I started my podcast way, way, way back, the very first one, I had huge expectations for how it would convert for me. And it did convert, but it didn't like unfold the way I imagined. And I had a really big shift when I started to hear from clients who said, hey, I heard you speak at that event, and I know you have a podcast. So I went and listened to your podcast, and I was like, I'm in. I really want to work with you. I think you're exactly what I need. Because what it does is it allows you to build a different kind of credibility and a relationship with leads. It is not necessarily the mechanism that's going to go out and kind of cull new leads from cold audiences, from cold listener base. It builds and nurtures trust. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Now, I'm not saying it can't. And it really depends a lot on what your business is, what angle you have, what your niche is, like what kind of work you do. There's a lot of components to how a podcast supports your business. But a podcast is not always going to create instant buyers every week, but it should build familiarity, trust, intimacy, and credibility in a way that very, very few platforms can. Now, if you caught my episode about the content ecosystem and why I'm really raving about Substack, all of this ecosystem is embedded together in a way that keeps that connectivity between your podcast and your content really close. And it's a very, very powerful compounding effect. But whether you're doing it through another platform or you're using a tool like Substack or a platform like Substack, when people hear you someplace else and then they start binging your episodes, they're hearing your voice, they're feeling your conviction, they're understanding your framework, they're starting to see you as an obvious guide long before they ever book a call, or they're recognizing very quickly that person's not for me. Their energy doesn't land. I don't necessarily feel the desire, or I'm recognizing where their specialty is, where their work is not really where I need to go. So it is a sorting tool to keep that in mind. Lesson 3, if your show is not anchored in your authority platform, your reach is going to stall. I truly believe this is why a lot of people have podcasts that don't perform for them. See, the podcast is a way that you amplify the reach of your message in the world. It should not be a rotating list of random topics. And this starts with the topics you cover and goes all the way out through the topics that you bring on if you have guests. which I'm a huge fan of having guests on your show for a lot of reasons. But you have to get really, really clear on what I call your leadership voice, hone it into a lighthouse message. The lighthouse message is your signature message. It's the thing that people really get clear on why you, like what you are about. You need to know what you stand for. It helps if you have your content tied back to your body of work. And when these things are integrated, your podcast is a silent salesperson working behind the scenes. And without that anchor, it's very easy for the podcast to get scattered, to have content that maybe deflates your authority instead of boosts your authority. And so when I work with clients on established podcasts or even just their idea, oftentimes they'll come to me with a content list and I'm like, well, how does this tie back? Because they've gotten excited about something and they've forgotten how to keep that through thread. And it's very hard to do for yourself, I know. So, when I'm coaching and mentoring my thought leaders, that's one of the anchor points that I hold for them. And you need that in your business if you can't do that for yourself. Let's go to lesson 4. The best podcasts are not built just around an information transfer. They are built to develop trust. Let me go a little bit deeper into this. And if you've been listening for a while, I think this is worth looking at. At a certain point, you may come in for the information, but people stay and they keep coming back because of the trust, because of the connection, because there's something here that makes you feel like you're part of something, right? And so I really believe I call it the amplifiers. We're a community. And I'm actually growing that community now on Substack even more. And so when you think about a podcast, the information's only going to take you so far, but you have to be able to trust the host. That's why being a guest on other people's podcasts that have built that trust is so valuable, because that trust is extended to the guests. That's why you have to vet your guests. You can't just have anybody on your show. So I think a lot of people, or a lot of experts who host podcasts, they think they need to teach more, explain more, maybe bring on super impressive guests. I don't really think that that's what you need your podcast for. Your guests, I'm going to talk about guests in a minute, so I'm going to hold that. But your deeper role of the podcast is to give people an experience of proximity to you. They're not just learning from you. They're deciding whether they can trust your perspective, your energy, your leadership, that if you can guide them to the future they want. Do they feel like they can trust you to deliver? Okay, now some of this is going to be like, do you have the audience cultivated properly? But that's what should be happening with your podcast. It is a trust and credibility positioning tool. Let's go to lesson 5. Your podcast is one of your most valuable collaboration assets if you have developed it properly. And I think this is an area that a lot of experts are underutilizing. And I truly believe that when you are collaborating with your peers, if you have a platform where you have established trust and you trust that person and you believe they have valuable contribution of knowledge to deliver to your community, and in this case, you, the listener, that podcast gives a great opportunity to give them visibility, to give them a platform to share their message, for you to collaborate with them. This could be a peer, it could be a client, it could be a strategic partner, it could be a potential referral source, event hosts, authors, movement leaders, whatever it is. But this is not just a media channel. It is a relationship building platform. And you have developed, when you have a great podcast, you have developed a way to build trust with your audience, but also share that trust with other business owners that you're collaborating with. Because the win-win-win is I know my listeners want this kind of outcome. My guests, they share that goal, right? They have content, they have expertise, they have wisdom that I believe is valuable to my audience. And I'm giving them visibility, right? So that's the win-win-win. So your podcast can actually be one of your most valuable collaboration assets if you know how to frame the guest interviews properly. Let's go to lesson 6. A great podcast nurtures the right leads while you're doing other things. I kind of alluded to this already, but this was a wake up call for me when I realized this was happening. Your podcast is part of your invisible sales force, and a strong episode can answer objections, it can deepen desire, it can showcase your philosophy, your values, why you, it demonstrates your expertise, it tells stories, and it helps people really bond with you. And when it's done well, you can actually help someone who's considering working with you. They can self identify as ready to move forward. Okay, and in my experience, they don't comment, they don't share it, they don't even message you right away. But there's this quiet reinforcement happening behind the scenes. An example, recently I had an amazing woman who met me at an event I was hosting. She had been referred in by someone else, and she had really kind of like been on the sidelines a little bit of the event. But what I learned later was she was actually binging the podcast because she was interested. But we all know that an event can be curated. When they start looking at multiple channels and start looking for reinforcement of, are you real? Are you the one they want to work with? What you're doing is you're giving them multiple ways for them to experience you and learn to trust you. That's that 7-11, or sorry, those, yeah, 7-4-11 model that I talked about in a few episodes back that we'll link up in the show notes. You need to recognize that your best leads are probably looking for ways to validate you are the one. So if you put your podcast to work for you, you can consider doing things like having short series, like I did my discernment series last year. That was a huge opportunity for people to recognize why me. I've done series on authority. I've done short series on all kinds of things. I'm injecting different solos all the time into the interviews I do. The solos are for my ideal clients to recognize, am I the right one? And that strategic design of content is your best sales force. Let's move to 7, lesson 7, pod fade. We got to talk about pod fade because pod fade is something where people start a podcast. They have all the best intentions. They get about 10 to 20 episodes in and the podcast stalls. Or it could be even a couple years in and it stalls. Look, let's be real. A podcast costs money to produce. It takes time. It takes focus. It is another thing to market and to develop. It's not for everyone. But Podfade usually isn't a motivation problem. It's a systems problem. Because the people that often stop podcasting is because A, they're not seeing the ROI, or B, it's too heavy of a load to continue. And I want to say straight out, there's zero way I would ever get this podcast done regularly if it was relying solely on me. I have a team. I have a tool that keeps us consistent. Like we have workflow mapped out and it drops and it says, hey, where's the thing that's supposed to be done today? And it gets my team to do the parts that they do. I record the content. I vet the guests after my team does an initial approval of any pitches. And then the rest is on me to produce the right content. And then I hand it off to my team and they do all of the production and all of the delivery. And that's the only way this gets done. Does that sound expensive? Well, it is an investment. But that's because I believe in what this podcast does. I believe in the value of this work, and I believe that it really it's a valuable part of my ecosystem. So people don't stop podcasting because it's like not motivating them anymore. I mean, I think a few people here and there, maybe they're like, I've said everything I need to say. But when you have all the things on your plate and you don't have the right support, you don't have tech that manages your deliverables and keeps you accountable, maybe you don't have somebody to help you execute the pieces that you're not good at, it's a lot to carry. And I think that's why so many people hit pod fade. If the ROI is not meeting the level of commitment and investment of time and energy you are making, you're going to start doubting whether or not it's worth it. So you have to look at all the different ways that your podcast is delivering an ROI beyond the am I getting clients? Because there's so much more than that. Yes, we need the revenue. But if you stop there, you're missing the best parts of your podcast. So I would give you one action if this is up for you. Start looking at how to simplify the podcast, how to make it better, and how to turn it into a part of your ecosystem. This is one of the best ways to start producing content and having it work continually for you even after it airs. Lesson 8. Your podcast should not be separate from your offers, content, and visibility strategy. We've been talking about this ecosystem concept. So your podcast should be seeding your offers. It should be connected to your business content ecosystem. It should feed other articles. It should infuse your social posts. It should be integrated into emails, live streams, all the different ways in which you're touching your clients, where you're engaging them, you're reaching them. Your podcast, when you interject it into the other elements of your marketing and sales, it's going to perform 100 times better. Again, another shout out for Substack. This is why Substack works so well. If you go to my Substack Growth Fuel, you'll see, because there's actually a private podcast there just for paid subscribers, but you'll see how podcast content I cover here gets infused over there, right? And when the podcast sits off to side as its own content and you don't have like a promotional campaign, it's not infused into your social media, nobody really knows what you're talking about on the podcast, of course it's not going to do more for you. I mean, we even weave it into when somebody books a call with me, we weave in certain podcast episodes that we know can help them get to know my work better and decide if they want to work with me. So it should be integrated into your ecosystem. Lesson 9, let's talk about guests, because there's a lot of confusing information out there about guests. And some people are like, absolutely, all of my episodes are guests. Other people are, hey, I've been told that I'm having too many guest episodes and I'm giving away my leads to someone else. Well, maybe. There's a really important reason why we have guests. They are authority by association. So when you are selecting guests, it is a collaboration extension, which means they are intentionally there to either bring new listeners in, to showcase work and complementary offers than what you do, or there is a conversation that you're co-creating that you wouldn't be able to deliver on your own. So the right guests strengthen your authority, your trust, your credibility, your positioning. They expand the podcast's reach into new audiences. And it should be a valuable platform to extend to collaboration partners. Where things go right is when you have random guest selection, where you don't have criteria, where you don't filter out people who are maybe just trying to leverage your show to reach new clients. There are people who they're just paying people to pitch them to get on shows willy-nilly, whether there's a real alignment or not. This was kind of a costly lesson for me. I went through a season, once my show hit the top 1%, boy, we were getting pitched by everybody. And there were a few people I was like, that's a really great topic. And I know what it's like when you're getting started. You need some people to say yes. So I brought them on. They were horrible. And I was like, do I even air this? And I know sometimes like the right episode just hits somebody who needs to hear a certain message. But it also caused me to raise my standards and to really be more discerning about the guests that get an opportunity to get in front of you, my listener. So don't throw the guest episodes out the window because somebody said you're giving away all your best leads. That means you're not infusing your brilliance into the way you hold the container for the guest. Excellence as a podcast host is knowing how to keep your anchor as the authority while you have a great conversation with somebody who complements what you do. You do not need to bring competitors on your show. Sometimes it's a win. Sometimes you can do that elegantly and well, but the right guests are going to catapult your reach and by association, grow your authority and trust as well. Let's get into the grand finale, lesson 10. I think that this is also really important. The lesson is that your measure of success on your podcast is not downloads. It is not. It's the impact you're making. It's the reach you're experiencing. It's the people's lives you're changing. And I want you to just think about it like this. If you could be in a room with 30 people and you impacted their lives, and let's say 10% of them became clients, would that feel like a win? If you could be in a room of 100 people and you were leaving a lasting imprint on them and they were buying from you and buying from your partners, would that feel like a win? We get distorted when we hear about podcast downloads in the thousands and we think, why am I not getting thousands of downloads? Honestly, I've never been focused on that. I'm curating a conversation with the right people who want to show up over and over and over again. Some of the listeners of this podcast have been listening since the beginning. They keep coming back. Maybe not every episode, but they keep coming back. And yes, we do hope to keep attracting more people. But downloads, yes, they matter, but they're not the entire reason we do this. Okay, your podcast is creating trust. It's helping you get more speaking invitations. It's getting you guesting opportunities. It's helping you develop strategic partnerships. It's maybe growing your community, your audience, your social media. It's giving you media credibility for sure. And if you ever decide you want to write a book, your podcast is an essential platform. But if you shift out of how many people are listening and into a better, more empowering question of what doors is this episode opening? Am I building trust? Is it compounding my authority? Is it helping me nurture my relationship with clients who might be referring me or potentially choosing me? That's what we're here to do. Shift the conversation in your head, my friend. And if you've had a podcast that's had a really, really small reach for a very long time, the opportunity is to say, what am I willing to do differently to grow my reach? There's always something to do that shifts as an expert thought leader service provider. You get to decide what you're going to focus on and what you're going to expand. I hope that you have found at least one or two insights in the top 10 list of what I've learned through podcasting and really what some of the shifts in my own perspective have looked like after spending this much time with you to cultivating this conversation around amplifying your success. And we're about ready to hit the 500th episode. This is episode 499. In the 500th episode, I'm going to cover something really unique and slightly the other side of why I podcast. And I will be sharing it with you next week. So be sure to tune in. And I want to leave you with one thought. The microphone is an amplifier. Choosing to show up in podcast is an opportunity for you to amplify a message, trust, credibility, and build authority. Do it with integrity, with value, and with massive commitment to the long game, not just what am I getting out of it today? And it's going to change your life. All right, I can see you next week for another episode of Amplify Your Success.